Okay, welcome back. We are doing our recording for section 6.2. Remember, as always with videos, you can pause them, you can go back to them, break it up into chunks, whatever works for you, just make sure that you watch them. It'd be a great idea to write down some notes as you are going through also. So I just want to do a quick review of things that we talked about in 6.1. So remember, 6.1 is about these mechanisms or things that drive evolution. First and most important thing is this thing called natural selection. Okay, natural selection right here. All right, natural selection, remember, is just this idea that organisms that have good traits or traits that help them survive, they pass those traits on, and then those traits become more and more common in the ecosystem because those traits are successful. Okay, and then bad traits become less and less common because those organisms don't survive. Okay, Charles Darwin is the one that figured this out. That's Charles Darwin right there. Many of his discoveries were done in the Galapagos Islands. Oops. A lot, and this natural selection is all based on the fact that there is variety. Okay, variety, remember, are just differences in an ecosystem. Okay, variety, like this right here, variety is really important because it helps to keep populations stable. If everything was the same, and this is something we've talked about before, if every organism in the population was exactly the same, then the entire population could die because of a change in the environment. Okay, but if there's variety present, some variety might be successful and then those organisms would become more common. But that right there, put a star by that, very important to remember. Variety keeps populations stable because that allows for changes to happen and some to survive instead of them all having the same weaknesses. Okay, good variations are called adaptations. 4 rules for natural selection. Very good to remember those. Okay, section 6.2, which is where we're at today. So section 6.2 is it's about evidence that supports evolution. And remember, so Darwin came up with this idea of natural selection, and then since then, scientists have been looking for evidence to help support that. Okay, so one of the things is fossils. Okay, you've probably heard of fossils before. A fossil is just the remains of past life. Okay, so something that used to be alive, and these can be for plants or animals. They've even found fossils of microorganisms, things that are very small. And that's what a fossil is. So we typically think of fossils as dinosaur bones. A lot of fossils are not dinosaur bones. Some of them are plants or, like I said, even microorganisms. Shells are very common to be fossils. Okay, there are a few major types of fossils. Okay, so we have an imprint. Okay, imprints are like, this would be like a dinosaur footprint. Okay, like if you step into the mud, your foot leaves an imprint in there in the mud. So imprints are often like footprints. It's a good one to have written down. So imprints are types of fossils. Then we have molds. A mold is what you would typically think of as a dinosaur or as a fossil. So like the bones that we have here of the T-Rex. Okay, so each of the bones, they are a mold of the bone. Okay, there are frozen organisms. Some organisms, just like it says, get frozen under permafrost. And then there's some organisms that are trapped in sap. If you've ever seen the movie Jurassic Park, the first one, that's how they were collecting mosquitoes. So those are some basic types of fossils. But a big thing is to remember fossils are just evidence for past life. Now, the thing about fossils is they are only found in a certain type of rock. In 8th grade, you'll learn more about different types of rocks. There's 3 types. The only type of rock that contains fossils is sedimentary rock. Okay, sedimentary rock is rock that's formed by mud and sand and other types of particles that settle in water. So at the bottom of the river, if you've ever walked in like the Pomme de Terre River, or even at the bottom of a lake, how it's soft, sandy, like in those parts, okay, that stuff over a long period of time continues to get covered up and covered up and covered up, and it gets compacted, and eventually, after a long, long time, turns into rocks. Okay, these are where fossils are found. So this right here Those little white things, those are actually shells. I know it's kind of hard to see, but those are shells that are found in sedimentary rock. If you've ever seen rock formations like this, where they have those different layers, okay, that is sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock, again, it forms layers, and the reason there's different colors is because it depends on what type of sediments or particles land there. So each layer is a little bit different because of the different type of particles that are there. Okay. Now, sedimentary rock is good for another reason. It holds fossils, but it's also good because it allows scientists to date the objects that they find there. Okay, and what that means is they can estimate or find a pretty accurate date on how old things are. Okay, so there's two types of dating that we're going to talk about. Relative dating, okay, relative dating, and radioactive dating. Relative dating, up at the top, is an estimate. Okay, it's an estimate of the objects in relation to something else. It doesn't give an exact age, but it's just an estimate. And the way this works is scientists use something called superposition. Okay, superposition is the idea that older stuff is at the bottom and younger stuff is at the top. Okay, in your science folder is probably a great example of superposition. If you were to look through your folder, I bet the older stuff is at the bottom and the newer stuff is at the top. Okay, the same thing happens with rocks. So if we were to go back and look at this outcrop of sedimentary rock, the old stuff gets put in down here at the bottom. Okay, and then newer rocks layer up on top. So if I found a dinosaur bone here, I know that this dinosaur bone right here is younger than a bone that I found down here. Okay, it has to be, because the rocks keep piling up on top where the oldest stuff is at the bottom and the newer stuff is at the top. So superposition says that old stuff goes at the bottom, new stuff goes at the top. Now, this doesn't tell me exactly how old they are. All I know is that this bone at the bottom is older than this bone at the top. Okay? That's why it's called relative dating. It's an estimate. Okay, that's just like me saying, I am older than my brother. Okay, you don't know how old they are. You don't know how old I am or how old he is. You just know that I'm older than my brother. Okay, that's an example of relative dating. You know our ages relative to each other. Okay, now this other form of dating called radioactive dating is a little bit complicated, and it's something you'll learn more about in next year, but it's just a more active or accurate date to objects. And that's all we're really going to worry about with that right now. It uses half-lives of isotopes and that type of thing. So radioactive dating is more accurate, gives you exact dates. Relative dating is an estimate. Okay? So the next thing to know is that fossils show this evidence of past life, but it's hard to find this evidence. It seems like fossils are everywhere, but they're not. They're very, very hard to find, and there's very, relative to all of the organisms that have lived on the Earth's history, they've found very few parts of it. Okay, so finding the Earth, like looking at Earth's history, is kind of like reading a book where you don't have all the pages. Okay, there's chunks of it that are missing. Some of it haven't been recorded. Some of it hasn't been discovered. So this evidence for physical evidence, like fossils, is hard to come by. Okay, there's other pieces of evidence besides fossils, and one of these pieces of evidence of evolution are things called homologous structures. Okay, homologous structures. That's what this word is right here, homologous. Okay, if you remember last chapter, we talked about homozygous. Okay, so homozygous means the same. Okay, so homologous kind of sounds similar to that, and that's what it means. It means similar or the same. So a homologous body structure is something that it shows organisms that have similar parts. Okay, and scientists believe that this shows that species have common ancestors, or kind of related, maybe even. So the example that we have right here of homologous structures are the arm or the front leg of mammals. Okay, so we have a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. All are mammals, and if you notice, they all have the same bone structure in their arm. They have one big bone at the top, two smaller bones down below, and then they all have wrist bones right there, and right there. Okay, so even though humans, cats, whales, and bats, we all use these arms differently, we all have the same bone structure in there. So scientists point that out as, mammals are all are all similar. They have similar homologous body structures, so maybe they have a similar common ancestor. Okay, or they have there must be some connection there because of how similar things are. Okay, homologous body structures. The next one is known as a vestigial structure. Okay, a vestigial structure is a body part that is reduced in size or doesn't seem to have a function anymore. Okay, these structures are no longer used. So a vestigial structure is something that organisms have but doesn't get used anymore, but maybe were used by a past ancestor. Okay, so for example, in a whale here, whales actually have hip bones. See right here? That's a hip bone. Whales have them. If you look at the outside of the whale, you would never know they're there, but inside, where their skeleton is, you can see they have very small hip bones. Now, whales don't need hip bones because they don't have legs, but here they are. There are hip bones, which, again, it's a vestigial structure that leads scientists to believe that maybe an ancestor of whales walked on land. Okay? Kind of like a seal or a walrus. Those organisms are very similar to whales, but they can be on land or in the water. They also have hip bones. So just an example. Examples in humans, we as humans have something called an appendix. Maybe you even know somebody that lost an appendix. I don't have my appendix anymore. That is a vestigial structure. It's not something that we use anymore, but it's something that is present in humans. Okay? So there are some structures that scientists believe are no longer useful that point to past use of an ancestor. Okay, the final piece of evidence is something called embryology. Okay, embryology is the study of the development of embryos. Okay, now we just got done looking at chickens and that type of stuff. Scientists find that organisms, as they develop, they tend to look very similar. So when an organism starts out in its earliest stages of development, like this right here, all of these organisms, they look pretty close. It's very hard to tell them apart. And then as they move further and further into development, they separate. Okay, they become more and more distinguishable. So like we have a fish, a bird, a rabbit, a human, all things that are different as they develop, but because they start out so similar, scientists think, well, they have a similar development structure, so then maybe there must be some relation there too. So it's just a way to look at things. There's also closely related DNA. Okay, DNA is another thing that relates to this embryology study, and it's interesting, we've talked about this last chapter, that all of the organisms on the planet have DNA, and all of the DNA of all of the organisms is made of the exact same stuff. So there's some evidence for evolution. Remember, as you're watching this video, pause it, review it, go back to it, make sure you jot some stuff down, and if you have questions, make sure that you ask me in class. Okay, thank you.